The housing crisis. You've heard of it. You felt it likely. It's still around, and it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere anytime soon. Policymakers in Canada have been attempting to tackle the massive issue to little avail. But one team of journalists based in Montreal have an idea why policymakers might not be able to end this crisis, and they're calling it the largest investigation into the housing crisis ever done in Canada. The following interview you're about to hear is with these two journalists, Isaac Peltz and Gabrielle Brassard-Lecours. The research they are doing is already racking up millions of views on social media. Clearly, people are paying attention. Here's the interview. Hi there.
Hi,
Hi.
How are you two doing?
doing well, thank you.
Well, thanks.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I am here speaking with independent journalists Isaac Peltz and Gabrielle. I'm sorry, hold on. I have to get your full name on this. Gabrielle Brassard-Lecours. All right. I'm here speaking with Isaac Peltz and Gabrielle Brassard-Lecours, and we're going to be talking about a project of theirs, some research they've been doing, and some viral attention, perhaps, that this project is receiving.
Bless.
Yeah. So, I mean, Isaac, you've been making some online content about the housing
hmm
crisis, specifically about uh, this information request you did. You want to talk a bit about that?
Well, the information request is the one that blew up, but I've been doing much more than that, of course. But yeah,
Mhm.
my request for information from the Quebec government it went viral. There's a 3.5 million people who've seen it or something like that, which is not as fun as you think. Going viral, unpleasant experience. Would not recommend it. Um,
It's
I have
also
people. Yeah, go ahead, Gab.
no, I was gonna say it's also funny because I don't want to take any merit from Isaac, but this is something journalists do every day of their life.
Every
They make
day.
requests for information
Yeah,
every day.
Mm-hmm.
all the
It's
time.
not something special. It's
Yeah.
not something that's But the thing is, nobody talks about what we do as
Mm,
journalists, and there was the whole that was the whole point of our
yes.
project, Do Duet. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting that people are keen to know what we're doing, and this is why Isaac's video got viral because
I
they're
think
like,
Gab
"Oh,
is
that's what
exactly right.
journalists do."
Yeah.
They make requests for sensitive information. That's crazy, but it's not that crazy. It's just that
It's
usually
not.
we don't really talk about it because we don't,
Mm-hmm.
we do our own stuff. We're in the corner,
Yeah.
but that was the whole challenge of Do Duet was to, in counterpart of people's support, we would bring them into our investigation and telling them what we do, how we work. And I think Isaac's going viral is a proof that people are interested in knowing how we do stuff.
Yeah, frankly, like it's the least exciting thing ever that I called the Quebec Parliament and I was like, "Hey, I'd like access to this information." It's so normal for journalists and you know this already, Calvin. But
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things where the onus of this project that me and Gab started together was to be very transparent about the work we are doing as we do it. And that's frustrating too for some people. I've gotten a few people literally get mad at me online being like, "Where's the list? I hate you." I've had people say, "I hate you," because and I already and it's like, well, actually, I put the list that is already done as much as it's done in my link in bio, but people don't understand how time works, and because of the compression of the internet, they think that everything is instant. And so the fact that
Mm-hmm.
it took, a week for me to finish up my first list, um, people think is was a very long time when it wasn't actually. Waiting is part of the journalist game, and but people really do want to know what's going on behind the scenes and they want to know about investigations. Daily news is, I think,
Mm-hmm.
less interesting for people. It's kind of required. We have a lot of good daily news coming out, but it's also people want to know deeper things. People are ready for depth in journalism and they want to
Mm-hmm.
see how it's
Mm-hmm.
made. They otherwise, how can they trust us?
Oh, absolutely. Can you tell me a bit about this information request? What were you requesting that got so much hubbub?
Yeah, well, basically, I was researching federal politicians. They have a database online that's easily accessible, very obtuse, so it's hard to parse through all the information that's on the online database. But the Quebec politicians, they have a database, but it's extremely flawed. you can go look at who owns what, but then a lot of things aren't declared, and anything under $10,000 of value doesn't have to be declared. And I got a little confused because, as much as I know that not all of them are landlords, uh, none of them were declaring their family houses, which I found to be a little bit problematic. And so I reached out to the National Assembly and requested to know about all their family houses too. And the reason I did that is it's because my goals with this project have been a little bit different than, for example, the Maple list. Maple, an excellent read the maple.ca. I recommend going
Mhm.
checking out their list. They have a list called landlordmps.ca. It's an excellent resource. It's a little outdated now. That's okay. It's 2 years old or whatever. But they made a great list, but they didn't have the information I wanted. I want to know who owns even a family house. And
Mm.
the reason I want to know that is because our investigation into the housing project, I have a question. Is it a conflict of interest that somebody has a family house, that somebody has an investment in land? Because why would you ever want that housing prices to come down if you own even a family house? That was my question.
Mhm.
And Maple didn't answer that.
No, incredible, incredible. So, before you talk, you introduced Do a Duet, but can you tell me a bit more about it and how it started? So, it's this kind of, as I understand it, this desire for journalism with more depth, more transparency, and
Mm.
from what I understand, you're right now both of you looking at the housing crisis.
Yeah, go ahead, Gab.
No, you start.
Well, Gab and I went to a chalet one weekend together. We won a grant to do the investigation into the housing crisis. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, like, like I think what we're doing is really good, but I also think that it's hard to trust journalists. And so I proposed to Gab that we start a maybe just something where it's more transparent, where instead of just talking about, the daily news or, I've seen a lot of really good journalists online responding to the right or, leftists who are responding to like far right propaganda, but people aren't talking too much about the news and how they're making investigations. So I proposed to Gab, why don't we do something super transparent? And then Gab and I developed it. We drank a little too much while we were developing this. So everything that we have started was the result of a mildly drunken bender.
Yeah, and the idea was really to be transparent, to try something new, especially working as a duo, because journalists usually work alone, even if they're in the
Mm,
newsroom. The fact also that I'm French and Isaac is Anglo is also interesting because we're bringing bilingualism in this thing. And it's also interesting I reach out, I attract more French people and Isaac Anglo, so that's also very interesting.
but we all also both
Nice.
speak the other language and have both published in both
Mm-hmm.
languages. So,
Yeah,
there's
Incredible,
that
yeah.
advantage too. But
yeah.
also just, in case you don't know who Gab is, she founded Pivot. She founded Ricochet. She was the president of the Association des journalistes indépendants du Québec for how long, Gab?
6 years.
6 years. That's the Independent Journalists Association of
So
Quebec.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm
If
less
Gab
known on
says
TikTok, but I'm known in the
but
media.
she's
Of
extremely
course, of
well known in the
course.
media. But if Gab is saying that something needs to change or that there's something coming in journalism, I just recommend you listen to Gab. She's
Mm-hmm.
always right, like 100% of the time is correct. So, um, if you want to know about the future of journalism, talk to Gab.
Incredible. That's what I'm
Yeah,
trying to do
that's
right
true.
now.
Yeah, you should. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, working with Isaac is great because yeah, it's a new energy and it's something innovative, and I've always been keen to do new stuff. That's why I co-founded media, right? So
Mm-hmm. No, of
yeah.
course, of course. Let's. I want to start getting into the actual like content of this kind of research that you're doing, and it's no easy task, right, to start unpacking the housing crisis. I feel like there's a lot of pieces on it that kind of get like little. You get piecemeal approaches to it. You look at some little aspects of it. But when you two decide you wanted to cover this, when you got the grant for it, where did you start?
Well, our general angle was we started like investigating more like the political side. So,
Mm-hmm.
why aren't any social housing being built in the last 30 years in Quebec, for example? What's happening? What's the responsibility of municipal level, provincial level, national level?
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to to seek out, who's responsible for what, where is the money coming from, how come, the neighborhood like Griffintown in Montreal is left to, all just like private businesses. So that was our end goal, and we ended up talking to like a bunch of people. I think we're probably up to like 30 interviews. So we
Wow.
we talked to a large range of people.
Like
So that was
25, like
our
25.
yeah. Well, we'll be probably at 30 by the end, but so yeah, so it's a lot of and it is a bit overwhelming. We're starting to produce now, so we're doing a podcast and also written pieces, and it's we had to do like a very serious plan on which part we're gonna put in which pieces, because there's so much. And
My
every
goal
day there's a new
is
thing coming up also in the news, right?
Mm-hmm.
So last week the TAL thing with the 5.9
mm,
recommendations, so we
Mm-hmm.
constantly have to be updated on what's happening too. So so that's why we thought it would be easier to do like a broader picture of the housing
Mm-hmm.
crisis, including its history.
my goal personally, and this is part of the reason people started listening, is because I kept saying the sentence, "We are making the largest investigation ever made into the housing crisis," which
Mm-hmm.
is I'm pretty sure objectively true. The only one I can think of that compares to this is CBC's Fifth Estate. Um,
Right.
but but ours is more political than theirs, and they tend to give a lot more empathy to landlords than I do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, different angle, different style, and I'm pretty sure even bigger, but I can't definitively prove that. So,
Do you think the Fifth Estate doesn't cover that political angle because it's sort of a blind spot? I find that's something that's kind of this recurring thing I come across with a lot of like reporting on housing or these kinds of assumptions that or things that people take for granted, right? Like a landlord being an MP, people it doesn't seem to raise questions. But I guess I want to ask you then, like, why is an MP or an M&A being a landlord a potential conflict of interest?
if you want to know about why media doesn't cover a political angle, you should ask Gab, because she'll give you a hinged answer, because I'm going to be unhinged if I start talking about that subject. So, Gab, why
No,
why
but
does traditional media not cover that angle? Gab.
well, well, yeah, that's not exactly the question though, is it? It's on MPs being landlords. That's a
Uh,
problem
Which
because
one did
it
you want us to cover?
influences.
Because you asked kind of two
Yeah,
questions there.
yeah.
I did, yeah. So I mean, let's go with that first one about the Fifth Estate not really covering the political angle, and then you can cover the MPs and
Do it,
M&As
Gab.
being landlords.
Uh, no, you go on the media, Isaac. I think you're
Oh
also
man,
more.
Gab. Well, listen, the media is complex. Okay, I'm extremely critical of traditional media. Okay, the reason I'm extremely critical is because I'm a huge Noam Chomsky enjoyer, and the traditional media is an important resource for all of us. I think we all agree on that. We all agree things like the CBC are a necessary part of Canadian expression, right? I think we all agree on that, but when you rely on political institutions as your greatest source of information, as the CBC does, they want an opinion on a subject. Well, they call up an MP and they say, well, what's your thoughts on this? And that's usually one of the biggest headlines. When you rely on a political institution that has an agenda as your greatest source of information, you are never going to speak actual truth. And you also are going to withhold when you need to speak truth to power. So if you start saying it's pretty messed up that MPs are landlords, what if the MPs no longer will speak to you? Um,
Mm.
that's a really genuine question, and it's not necessarily CBC. Obviously, I'm focusing on them, but all of the major media groups do it. Canadian Press, we have National Post. If they start questioning these MPs, what if the MPs stop speaking to them? And that's a serious problem. Um,
Yeah, and I think it's also related to media funding, right? Because
Media funding. Yes.
we all think that we're so independent and we can say whatever, and be critic of everything, but there are always a political and financial agenda behind. Like, for example, CBC will be, I mean, I'm sure they're really critic of Polyev coming in, but he's the one who's going to fund them in the future. So they'll be very
Mm.
careful about what they say about Polyev, as they should, right? Because Polyev is already going to like cut them, a lot. But this is a problem that, because of the funding, like the ad revenues, maybe they have, some media might have ad from, I don't know, landlords, or private investment, housing companies. So that's also a problem. But for me, it's mostly MPs being landlords. Is that they're gonna make politics that are gonna be keen to landlords and not renters, because they
Hmm.
don't, they deal with renters. They want to, they want their investment to be good. And so they're a bit disconnected from the renters' reality. Our housing minister is saying things like, well, if you're poor, just don't be poor. And if you can't, rent an apartment, just buy one. Like,
Yeah,
in which
disconnected.
world in which world do
Uh,
you live to say things like
Hmm.
that? And she's our housing minister. That's
Hmm.
crazy. And you've seen all the politics that she's made are only landlords positive.
mhm.
So yeah, sorry,
The
I'm
thing
going to
is, no, that was great, Gab. It was an excellent point, and I just want to, like I said, the Maple list is an excellent resource that I
Hmm.
cross compared my database with theirs because of how good theirs was. It's just there's been a bunch of seat changes over the past few years, and that's why I wanted to make my own. Second, the
Hmm.
question for me is at the heart of this is not just are the MPs landlords, but if they own their own house, why would they ever want the housing market prices to go down? Now, I'll tell you, the reality is that if they really thought through it, they do want their housing market to go down because
Hmm. Right.
if the housing market prices go down, significant GDP rises because people can spend money on culture, on themselves, on food, on going out, on anything. But what they don't realize is it's because they're afraid to lose their future wealth. But if they bring down prices now, they don't need as much future wealth. So it's one of those misnomers where, oh, housing prices high is good for, no, it's not. It's actually bad for
Hmm.
everyone, including house owners. Um, so that's why I wanted to know about it. It's because I wonder if even just having a family home is in itself a conflict of interest within politics.
Right, right, right. Because yeah, it's a thing. I've spoken with some other guests on the show about the housing crisis, but so many Canadians, there, if they have whatever, the biggest asset that they have that they own is usually a house, right? So it's just kind of a
yeah.
fine line, right, between trying to create that affordability or solve the housing crisis, when at the same time it's like it's a thing of a value that so many people have that rely on, I guess.
Yeah, for
There's
me, it's
there's a
less a
point you make.
problem to have your own house than to be a landlord. I,
Hmm.
I think it's like less of a problem,
It's
but
definitely less of a problem. Like I wouldn't deny that. I'm not even saying it's necessarily a conflict of interest. I'm saying that it might
Hmm.
be, and I don't want to make
Right.
someone's mind up about that. I just got to ask the questions. That's it's the biggest part of being a journalist is asking the question. And
Of course.
conclusions.
No.
I can present my conclusions, but you're going to have different ones, and that's up to everyone else.
No, I understand. I feel like the point is almost like if someone's a homeowner, even if it's just a single home, their kind of material interests are going to be different than that of a renter who doesn't have to deal with that sort of stuff, and keeping
for
that value
sure.
sort of up.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's for sure.
yeah. Sir, do you come across many MPs or politicians who are renters, tenants, broke? They're driving like an old like Honda.
It does happen. It doesn't, once they're elected, they're no longer broke because they're paid, an
Right,
MP in
right,
the
of
federal
course.
office is paid $200,000 a year. I think it's 201,000 and 600. Anyways, it's some arbitrary number. But so no, the moment they're elected, they're no longer broke. But uh,
Right.
being elected to office, there are politicians who go into office from a place of poverty, but it's very hard. The reason it's very hard is because even to run for office takes significant investments. And the only way
Hmm.
that a single person who is poor could run for office is if they got funding from a vested group. So let's say there's a political group who wants somebody to run for office, they can invest significant amounts of money, and that person can now run for office. So, for example, in order to run for liberal leadership, I believe it was like you'd need a minimum of $300,000 investment. That's insane.
Ooh.
So, do you want to know why there is not really a left in Canadian politics? It's because it takes hundreds of thousands of dollars to even run for political office.
Hmm. Right. Just that cost kind of locks any kind of whatever renter class or tenant class out of it. Of course.
Unless there's a vested interest from someone. But then the question is, well, who is investing that money and what are their interests?
Hmm.
And there are progressive organizations that are doing that, but they're few and far between. So
Right. Right. They don't really represent the overall current of politics, I guess. I'm kind of before we were talking a bit about the history of the crisis, right? I think Gabrielle mentioned the unpacking the source of it, right? Because it definitely didn't start in the last few years. It didn't start 10 years ago. I will say, I think I was under the impression, well, I guess I was under the kind of loose impression that, like, with the 2008 financial crisis, that was really kind of like when things started taking off. But I saw in one video you mentioned that this started back in the 80s. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, actually, I think more in the 90s, from what we heard
Hmm.
from experts. But
my understanding is late 80s, early
yeah,
90s.
Early
exactly, yeah,
90s.
same. So we've heard that a lot, and I'm actually right now working on like repertorying all the politics that been made around houses since the 90s, and they've evolved a lot. And some of them were made and not applied, like a lot of laws that are or projects that are passed. But yeah, I think it was in the 90s, it was access to property that rose a lot. But then it was never really controlled. There weren't politics that were made for renters, for example, like in other countries. And so now we're and we didn't um, we heard a lot of people who talked to us were talking about offers and demands. Is that how we say it in English?
Supply and demand.
Um,
Supply and demand.
Supply and demands,
Mm.
which is like the ultimate indicators that a city is going well. So if there's not a lot of offers, it's good because it means that it's properties are rare and so more expensive and so more GTS and so all this thing, and it spiraled into out of control. And now we didn't build enough also uh, social or different kind of housing. We just built houses for landlords and blocks, and so we didn't think ahead.
Mm.
And it's not because of the immigrants that the housing crisis, like that's not why no social housing has been built in the last 30 years. It's not because of
Hmm.
immigrants coming in. So I think this comes from this a little bit. But Isaac,
Mhm.
you can build on.
It's exactly that. We had it good in the 90s. We stopped investing in housing, and boom, welcomed. Because if you,
Yeah.
a basic Keynesian principle, and we function on, well, sort of a Keynesian economic system. If you don't know what that is, that's okay. Uh, Basically, what it means is that when times are good, you need to invest. And when times are
Hmm.
bad, you save money. Okay. So times were good in the 90s, pre-90s economic crash. They should have been investing into housing, into medical care. But instead, because things were good and everyone was prospering, they lowered taxes, they cut spending on public infrastructure, and it has resulted in basically a 40-year spiral.
Mm.
And every government, until the Trudeau government, kept cutting investments. And the Trudeau government is basically, I'm not a huge Trudeau fan, to be frank, but they're also scapegoats for 40 years of
Mhm.
cuts. And then you have a global pandemic, which put so much pressure and strain. Plus, I mean, when we're talking about immigration in the country, do you want to know who are also victims of no housing? Immigrants. How are you supposed to
Mhm.
find an affordable house for your family that you came here with? How are you supposed to find an affordable apartment when you came here as a student? How are you supposed to find anything? Uh, Cost of living is so high. Like it's prohibitive. And an immigrant coming here, I'm going to guess if they're like a refugee family, probably doesn't have a ton of money. I'm going to say to you that, there's students who are here who maybe have a lot of money because they're international students. Their parents might have a little bit more wealth, but also there might be some
Mhm.
who are earnestly looking for a better life, and they're not going to find one if they can't find a house, frankly. So it's not just Canadians who are suffering. We have now victimized immigrants as well. And that's, something that people and the media never talk about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I find so often that kind of immigrant narrative is left sort of unchallenged. Right. I mean, we see that both on like a federal and provincial level. Where I mean, was it like was it a few months ago? Right. Arun was talking about Arun Boise, the M&A for QS, and Maurice Richard was talking about the way that institutions sort of other immigrants, and they sort of paint them as a scapegoat. And he got so much flack for that, right? Even from his own party, from
Jeez.
all of the
Yeah.
Assemblée Nationale. I was like, wow, we can't even admit. To me, it reminded me a lot
No.
of that statement that
Oh
François
yeah.
Legault made way back, where he was like, "There's no systemic racism in Quebec," right?
Yeah.
Jesus
Well,
It's
Christ.
even the to
I
go
guess
back
from
to
that
the
kind of from
housing,
this perspective,
I was gonna say even from the housing crisis, it took him a few years to admit that there was one. You know.
yeah,
So
yeah, 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 of course.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and then on the federal level, right? We have Pierre Poilievre, who any messaging he does on housing, it's immediately tied to immigrants. And then when he mentions immigrants, he always talks about terrorists. He always talks about the we don't know who's coming over our borders, right? And then so those you have that kind of messaging tied. And I'm kind of wondering, from what you two have seen, what do you think is the or potential futures for housing policies? Is there any reprieve? What does it look like? How does it look like the conversation is going? Uh oh.
Is
Badly.
there's I mean, I'm not even sure there's gonna be a conversation, honest to be
Interesting.
honest with you. I mean,
um,
I don't know.
I'm going to tell you right now. Uh, uh, it'll take a minimum. Okay, based on my calculations and then talking, I had a conversation with a politician the other day, and for the first time, somebody told me the truth. Because based on my calculations, minimum 5 years to fix this housing crisis. Minimum. Okay.
Hmm.
If federal and provincial make the proper investments. Okay. So we have a bleak future. This is what I'm trying to say to you. Because um, Polyev, he's not going to make investments like that. He is going to rely on the private market to bring down prices. When you see a new condo on the market for sale, does it lower prices? No, it pushes prices up. It stays the same. The only way to lower prices is through political will that says, here's legislation, prices are lowered, and here is non-market housing, which means places that are co-ops.
Hmm.
All the words in English I am missing. Co-ops, that's it. Co-ops, socialized housing. That's it. That's
Yeah.
the word.
Of
Sorry.
course.
um, so under the conservative government, if we elect that, it will not happen. And under the Quebecois current government, the CAQ, we won't see that. I am curious to see the Parti Québécois. They have gone hard right in recent years, particularly on immigration, but they they also might go hard into investments into socialized housing. It's really hard to say because they only have three
Mhm.
people in office and they don't really have a party right now. So you have one guy, uh, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, who is
Mhm.
saying stuff, but like, what does he actually think? And what will happen when he has a large party who's trying to win office? And what happens when the Liberals push back? It's 2 years away as well. We really
Mhm.
can't predict how the Quebec's going to go in regards to that investment, but it's a balance that you need provincial and federal investments in order for housing to improve. It's not one or the
Yeah.
other, it's both.
Yeah. All
Mhm.
levels have responsibility. That's what we kind of learn. So
Yeah, of course. I feel like all levels sort of shirk that responsibility and point their fingers at everyone else.
Yeah.
Something
totally,
I've come across at least.
totally. Yeah. That's
Wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah,
I'm kind of
listen,
curious.
oh, I'm sorry, man.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just about to complain about politicians. I mean, me and
That's good.
Gab
That's good.
have done so many conversations with politicians, and not a
Hmm.
single one really wants to talk about the truth. Andres from Quebec Solidaire, I think he was pretty straight
Fantasy.
shooting. Yeah, he was great. I thought Guillaume Clichy-Rivard was all right. But only one party is kind of honest, Québec Solidaire, and the rest,
Hmm.
like they're just dishonest about the housing crisis, and they don't, because a lot of them are landlords, and they
Right.
don't want their investments to go down. They want to make more money with rent. They want it. That's why
Hmm.
it's a problem. And me and Gab have just one time I got an argument with a liberal MNA, and Gab was sitting there just with her face like this in her hand. She was just, and then at one point she was just like, Isaac,
You
we
froze,
have
I
to
think,
go.
Isaac.
Must have been a good moment.
It was,
Yeah,
I'm sure it was.
you're
Gab saved
frozen.
me from an eternal loop.
Nice.
Yeah, we're going in circles a little bit.
I think I guess from the people you've spoken to, people on the ground, like what are some solutions that people are talking about? Is like investments, non-market housing. Is there anything else that people are talking about?
Yeah, it was mostly that, and also like diversifying the kind of housing we're
Hmm.
invested in. So yeah, house
Hmm.
social, but HLM and yeah, off the market for sure.
Hmm.
What else? We talked to Util, which they are focused on student housing, and they made a big announcement today. I don't know if you saw, but like
I didn't.
they're yeah, they're making a super big project at Berry-UQAM above the about the bus station.
Mm.
So
Well, we knew about that.
they're
They told us about that in the interview, didn't they?
yeah, but they didn't make it. It
Oh,
wasn't official.
that was only us who knew about that, eh?
Yeah.
Ah,
Now it's
I didn't
public.
know
So
that.
now it's public since this morning. So, and I think it's great that they're, trying to, I mean, I'm sure they'd like to help everyone, but students are also, struggling with housing. So maybe
Yeah,
also
listen,
that's, and one of the politics that was made in the last year was not being able to evict elders,
Hmm.
so I mean, it's not
it's a
perfect, but
start.
at least it's something, it's a start.
Right.
So there are
I
small
think,
things, small
yeah,
victories sometimes, but it's on a global scale. It really
yeah,
needs to be more radical than that.
really well said, Gab. As always, I personally find um, the socialized housing thing to be a distraction sometimes because there are actual laws you can implement to bring down housing prices instantly. There's also alternative solutions to building. For example, in my research, I found 175,000 apartments on sale and houses on sale throughout Canada. 175,000, okay? Um, and the government could just purchase them and then turn it into socialized housing instantly. And we could see them if they did something like that, if they had investments like that, if they implemented laws bringing down housing prices, they could significantly solve this problem in 6 months, and they don't um, because, again, conflicts of interest because they don't want housing prices to come down. Also,
Right.
15% of Canadian GDP, 15% is invested in housing. So on a global scale, we look like chumps if you bring down the GDP because Canada, oh, why are we such an important country? Because we are the 10th largest GDP or 11th largest GDP on Earth. Okay, bring down that
Hmm.
GDP by 10% because you made housing prices affordable. Oh, suddenly we look way less appealing to foreign investors. Okay, so
Mm.
it's entire are the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we controlled by a democracy or are we controlled by a neoliberal financial incentives? Are our politicians actually doing what's good? Are they actually fighting for something that's good? Or are they just controlled by GDP and a global system that wants wealth? And it's not going to eternally grow. We are at the limit of growth.
Hmm. That's about a good place to stop as any, I think. Thank you very much for
Okay.
that. Thank you for both of you coming on to talk about this investigative project duet. People can also, I just want to make sure you can follow them at duoduet.substack.com. Is that right?
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah.
All right,
thank you.
perfect. Of course. course, of course. Thank you both for coming on, talk about your project. You can follow Gabrielle and Isaac Peltz's project at duoduet.substack.com. Looking forward to seeing
Thanks,
what else
guys.
you uncover. I hope.
Yeah.
I hope you stay safe.
Oh, get out of here.
Yeah, I saw those. I saw everyone in the
Those
comments
threats.
worried about. Yeah. Worried about this
It's
research
an
being a little
access
too.
to information. It's the least radical thing anyone's ever done.
Regardless, stay safe. Thank you so much for coming on and
Thank
doing
you,
the work
man.
you're doing.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that interview with journalists Isaac Peltz and Gabrielle Brassard-Lecours on their project Duo Duet and the largest investigation into the housing crisis in Canada. My name is Colin Dansaba. Thank you for listening.